value of assertiveness at work, how it helps you. Essentially, it makes you more of a credible authority. People take you more seriously. It helps improve communication if you're able to speak frankly and say no when you mean no and ask for things and stand up for yourself and so on. We'll learn the difference between passive, assertive, and aggressive behaviors on the spectrum, because a lot of people, maybe you've heard this before, somebody said, I don't like this person, he's too assertive. Well, there's really no such thing as too assertive. What they mean is they've gone beyond assertive to aggressive, which is a different thing. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. Other things you'll learn: assertive speech patterns and body language, because assertiveness is a set of skills and behaviors. So how to walk and talk and act and think like an assertive person until you develop those skills. How to ask for what you want and be persuasive about it. How to say no without offending people, because passive people cannot say no. Aggressive people say no, but they can be very blunt and cause offense, and we don't want either of those. So how to say no in a calm and firm manner where people accept your no, even to your boss. Would you like to learn that? And how to craft and deliver assertive messages for all sorts of situations. And we'll have some role plays and practice exercises where you can do that and learn how it works. All right, so beginning with self-esteem, we'll talk about that for a couple of minutes. That's really how you feel about yourself, how you value yourself, if you feel worthy and deserving. And this is a story you wrote for yourself when you were a child. It's a very interesting piece of psychology that we'll discuss in the course and learn how you could even rewrite that story to be more effective. But self-esteem is just valuing yourself, being comfortable with yourself, and being aware of the skills, qualities, and traits that you offer. And everybody has something to offer. So for example, we can look at the skills. We won't go through all of it, but here's a list of fairly common representative skills, and you probably see a number of them that you have, depending on your job in part, but also in how well you fit that job. So you may be very good at listening. You may be good at making decisions, negotiating, strategic thinking, or even operational thinking. So what we do in the course is we look at the skills, we look at some of the qualities and traits and behaviors that you already have, and we just acknowledge that there may be times when even the most successful people have doubts, and you need a little boost in self-esteem, and we talk about some ways of doing that. Once you've established self-esteem, which is not something you'll do in the class, but if you really need to work on that, we'll give you the tools so that you can continue to develop this on your own. Once you've got a foundation that's good enough for self-esteem, you can move on to confidence. And even the most lacking in confident person has felt confident at certain times. It's often situational. For example, you may not feel that confident with your boss or with senior people, but you may feel confident with more junior people, with your children, with your friends. So we know what it is. We've all done it. The question is, how do we apply it more broadly so that in these high-stakes situations at work, we're able to present ourselves in a confident way and to feel confident. So these are some of the things we need for confidence, how to prepare. if you think back to when you were in school and you have an exam coming up, if you're prepared, you feel more confident about the exam. If you are not prepared, you don't know the material, and you don't know it, you're not going to feel very confident. So preparation is something you can always work on in the long term. There's also affirmations that people may use to remind themselves that they are confident, when they're confident, how to be confident. Visualization exercises, which a lot of the most successful athletes and others who perform at the top of their game and in their field use regularly. And the magic of enthusiasm, because if you think about who are the most likable, confident people you like to be with, they're generally the ones who are enthusiastic. So how to amp up the enthusiasm. So having looked at the self-esteem and the confidence issues, then we move on to how to fake confidence if you feel you're not presenting it well. So here's a question, and I'd like an answer from somebody. You can type it into the chat. Do you think confidence is something that you feel inside, it's something that's internal to you, or do you feel it's something more external, something that people who look at you can see it's either there or it isn't there in your actions and behaviors? So what do you think, internal or external? I see most people saying both. Most people say both. And thank you for your contributions. Yes, it is both. And you can certainly imagine there are times when you feel confident inside and other people look at you and they can tell you're confident. There may be times when you don't feel confident and people can tell you're not confident. In fact, that's very common. Those are the two most common scenarios. What about this? Is it possible to not feel confident inside and people think you're confident, or you don't feel confident, rather you feel confident but people think you're not? I mean, that would be weird, but it could happen. Maybe you don't present yourself well. But the most interesting possibility is, what if I don't feel confident, but I can present myself so that people think I'm confident based on the way they perceive me? In other words, how to fake confidence. And that's actually something that we can do. And we spend a good bit of time talking about that. So some of the things we can do for that, this is just a brief summary, but we spend a lot of time practicing these behaviors. Confident people tend to smile more. Sometimes passive people smile, but it's not a real smile. We can tell there's something phony about it. But because confident people are comfortable with themselves and their surroundings, they're able to smile and be relaxed. Confident people are also decisive. They know what they want, and they say what they feel. Imagine somebody who's very indecisive. Well, I'm not sure, maybe this, maybe that, I don't really know. What do you think? All right, that doesn't sound like a confident person. So being decisive, not only making decisions, but in your actions. You walk from point A to point B, you don't just ramble mindlessly. A lot of it is in the voice, and we'll look specifically at the voice in a little while. People talk confidently, they sound confident and authoritative, and they just present themselves overall with an image of confidence. And you may know people in your life who are very confident. Maybe you have a boss or a colleague, or you know somebody who seems very confident and self-assured, and you can model them and learn to walk and talk and act like them. Maybe you've got a role model who's not even real, somebody like a character in a movie or a movie star. I think George Clooney is a good role model. I think women like him, guys like him, everybody likes him, very successful, charming, knows what he wants. Wouldn't it be great if we could be more like him? Or maybe you have some other role model that you choose to emulate. So this is a way over time to build up confident behavior so that it becomes easier over time, and pretty soon it just becomes second nature. It becomes the new you. You don't even have to think about it anymore. So having laid that foundation of self-esteem and confidence, we're able to move on to assertiveness, which is really the set of skills we're looking at. So a couple of definitions for assertiveness. First is just being able to communicate your interests in a way that is clear, direct, and considerate. Clear meaning you say what you think, you don't sugarcoat things, you don't drop a hint and hope that people will read your mind. You just say it like you think it. It's also direct, face-to-face, person-to-person. Could be by phone or email, but you're not going through third parties in a very roundabout way. It's person-to-person communication. You may remember when you were in secondary school and you were interested in somebody of the opposite sex, but you're very shy. So you don't ask her if she's interested, you ask your friend to ask her friend if she likes you, and it's a very roundabout thing, but we're all grown up now, we can deal face-to-face. And the third criterion is considerate, because passive people may not be very clear or direct. Aggressive people can be very clear and direct and even blunt and defensive. So the third criterion is considerate, because being blunt and offensive is not considerate, but you can still be direct and considerate. So that's the distinction. So of looking at assertiveness, but I like this other definition, able to stand up for yourself without stepping on anybody else's toes. Passive people have a hard time standing up for themselves or for others. Aggressive people can stand up for themselves very easily, but they often stomp on everybody else's toes with their lack of consideration. So it's a fine line, the middle path, where you can stand up for yourself without stepping on other people. So that's the definition I like of assertiveness. Let me just check on with the comments in case anybody has a question. Okay. Somebody asks, is confidence authoritative? That's a good question. The two often go together, and there's a fine line. In other words, you can put on an authoritative persona, and it may not be very warm. It may be a little bit cold. Or you can be very warm, but people don't really take you seriously. You don't seem that assertive. It's very hard. It's possible. Some people can do it. But it's very hard to have that balance where you can be authoritative and warm and sincere at the same time. So depending on the situation, you need to adjust yourself on that scale, a little more authoritative, a little more warm and friendly, depending on the situation. But as we said, some people, they're good at having a very good balance where it seems like they're both. So that's a good question. I think we have one more. How do you have assertive communicate with someone aggressive? All right, Caroline, thank you for that. We're going to cover that in a little bit. The short answer is assertive people can stand up for themselves and get the message across without going across that dividing line of being inconsiderate. I think Michelle Obama said it well, when they go low, we go high. It's about taking the high road and being calm and professional while still standing ground and not taking the bullying. But we'll talk a little bit about that very shortly. Now, some of you may have studied psychology, probably very few from my experience. But even if you haven't, you may have encountered this concept of fight or flight. Anybody hear about that before? Fight or flight. These are reactions, normal reactions. In fact, most developed animals exhibit these behaviors as well as people. If you're in a stressful or threatening situation, you usually react either fighting, which is aggression, or flight. Even though you don't have wings, you can still fly and avoid the situation or the person. And flight, of course, is very passive. So those are what animals do, because animals aren't very mentally developed like us. People don't have to just respond or react. They can take the third path, which is engaging. In other words, you don't fight, you don't avoid, you just engage, interact, discuss, which is the assertive behavior. So that's an advantage that humans have above other animals. So asserting yourself may mean discussing. It could mean arguing, not necessarily in an aggressive way. It could be negotiating, trying to solve a problem together. So assertiveness is something that humans can do, animals probably can't. And that's an advantage that we have. So based on these three things, we get this spectrum ranging from passive to assertive to aggressive. And passive is not very helpful for us professionally. Now, there may be times when you choose to be passive. It may be the wise course. But if you're always choosing that, if that's your nature, that's a problem. And there may be times to be mildly aggressive, not punch somebody in the face aggressive, but aggressive where you may have to raise your voice to stand up to somebody, as Caroline was asking about earlier. So as in most things, the middle path is preferred. We want to be assertive, stand up for ourselves, not step on other people's toes. But this is not three separate categories. This is a whole range of behaviors. So you can be very passive. You can be mildly passive, somewhat assertive, very assertive, highly assertive, borderline aggressive, very aggressive. Okay, a whole range of different shades. So if you're dealing with somebody who's aggressive and you're assertive, I mean, if you're passive, you're probably going to avoid. But if you're assertive and you're engaging with somebody who is aggressive, you may have to move along the continuum a little bit from, say, if 50 is the midpoint, maybe move up to 60 or 70 in terms of raising your voice and changing your body language a little bit to stand up to that kind of person. If you're dealing with another assertive person, two assertive people, then you probably don't have to do that. In fact, in the course, we look at a clip from a movie with Jack Nicholson, and it illustrates these three behaviors, and we see an example of how somebody who is normally assertive can become a little bit more towards aggressive without becoming violent or getting into trouble, just because the other party is overpoweringly aggressive. And sometimes if you're too passive or not quite assertive enough, it's not going to end well for you. So those 3 points among many points on the continuum. As we said, there are times for all of these. Most of the time, you want your default mode to be assertive. There may be times when you become more passive, and it could be a wise choice. Bottom line is choose your battles. You don't want to fight for every single little point, because then you become very tiresome, okay? Just because we're learning all of these assertive behaviors doesn't mean you have to do it every single time. You don't have to win every argument. There may be times to back down, and there may be times when you need to be a bit stronger. So it's about choose your battles. If it's important, you stand up for yourself or for somebody else if they deserve it. Or if it's not a big deal and it's not worth the time to fight about it, you may choose to be passive, or based on other situational factors, there may be a perfectly good reason to be passive in some cases. But if you have found yourself behaving passively all the time, then that's a problem. So why be assertive? Any ideas? Anybody want to throw something out in the chat? Some of the advantages or benefits? Okay, you don't want to be a pushover. Sometimes the word we use is a doormat, which I think is a very colorful way, because you don't want people to step on you and wipe their dirty feet on you. Get your point across. Yes, passive people, not only are they often reluctant to speak out, but when they do speak out, they may not be listened to and taken seriously. So it's very useful to get your point across. And certainly if you're giving a presentation at work, being able to assertively get your point across is going to make you more memorable, more persuasive, and generally more successful in your meetings and in your career. Okay. And there's one other reason. People don't usually come up with this idea. Obviously, it's good to be assertive because you get more out of life, people treat you better, you find more rewards in your work, and that's great on its own. But there's a problem if you're passive and you don't speak out, because you often have regrets. And later you say, why did I do that? I should have said something. I don't know why I gave in so easily. And that's not a nice thing, where you beat yourself up and have regrets because you didn't do something you wish you had done. In fact, they often say that people tend to regret the things they didn't do more than the things they did do. So passive people tend not to do as much. Assertive people are able to do more. So that alone, I think, is very useful for your mental well-being, being able to deal with situations and not have regrets that you couldn't do more. Even if you don't win, you can go to sleep thinking, you know what, I can rest easy. I feel comfortable, good about what I did. I did my best, but I can't win them all. I can't help it if this person is unreasonable or aggressive, whatever it may be. So these are some of the characteristics of the assertive people, and we will learn these and practice some of these in the class. Just the way you move, the way you stand, the way you walk has an influence on the way people perceive you. Being self-aware. You know, some people assertive behavior. People don't really take that seriously. The eye contact, people have trouble looking you in the eye. they tend to look away. And of course, too much eye contact could be intimidating as well, right? So again, the middle path. Some of the gestures, there are gestures that are both passive and aggressive that you want to avoid, and gestures that are confident and assertive and agreeable. So how to do those? Facial expression, decisiveness, and things like the voice and the handshake, so on. And if we're stable here, I think we're still okay. Let's look at the voice in particular. We can't cover all of this today, but we can give a little introduction to the voice. Are you all hearing me now? I see some comments. Okay, all right, so my screen looks a little funny, but people can hear me, good. Okay, so the vocal quality, we'll just spend a sort of a mini lesson on the voice. These are some of the elements of vocal quality. Your pitch, which is basically, do you have a deep voice or a high squeaky voice? And which do you think sounds more assertive? I think we know. A deeper voice sounds more assertive and compelling. And then the tone. Going back to the question about balancing authority and confidence, or warmth and authority. You can have a warm tone, and you can have a very authoritative tone, and possibly a good mix. But again, you have to choose and make adjustments based on the situation. So there are times when you need to be very authoritative. There are times when you can ease up and be warm and friendly. And if you're very good at this, you can have a good mix, and people will accept you as both at the same time. The volume, most of the time you want to be a little louder rather than too soft. Passive people tend to be soft-spoken, and soft-spoken people are perceived to be weak and ineffectual. It's just the way it is. I can't help that. So an easy thing you can do is just talk a little louder, at least in those key situations. Of course, if you're too loud, that could be perceived as aggressive. And there are some people, like Clint Eastwood comes to mind, where a soft voice could be a very strong thing. Like when he says, "Go ahead, make my day." It's not loud, but still very menacing. But for most people, a little bit louder rather than a little too soft. Sincerity or warmth. You don't want to be so authoritative that you're cold and unlikable. You want to have some warmth and sincerity, empathy, caring about people, so that they're still willing to play with you, team players, supportive, and buy into you. Pacing. A lot of times, if you talk too fast, it makes you sound nervous, anxious. If you talk too slow, it's just boring, and you never want to be boring. So pacing is about the mid-range, but maybe slightly on the slow side. Slightly on the slow side to show gravity. It seems like if you're talking very fast, you're afraid people aren't going to listen to you because you're not confident. Whereas if you're a senior person, you tend to speak slowly because you know people will listen. So probably if 50 isn't the midpoint, probably about 45 would be ideal. Occasionally you want to speak a little quicker to show urgency or excitement, but generally in the mid-range. So comment from Victoria, seems hard to do all that. Well, if it's new, it could be hard, but these are skills and behaviors that we're learning, and over time it becomes very easy and quite natural. Enthusiasm, we mentioned a little bit earlier. People who are enthusiastic are more liked and friendly, and people relate better to them. And the last one, modulation and emphasis. The one deadly sin in speaking is the monotone, where you sound like a computer, everything the same pitch and pace, almost like a machine. In fact, worse than a machine, because now we've got Siri and she sounds rather nice. So if the machine can modulate, then the human voice should be able to do that as well. So you want some highs and lows, some fast and slow, just a little variety to keep people awake, and emphasize key words and pause at the right time. And one other thing about emphasis, you have some people who, when they talk, every phrase goes upward, like they're asking a question, even when they're making a statement. So that uptick at the end of a sentence or phrase is not an assertive characteristic. In fact, you want to end on a slightly downward tone, as if to say, that's it. Case closed. I made up my mind. So modulation and emphasis. So all of these go into the voice and practice different vocalizations so you can at least learn what an authoritative, confident voice sounds like for you. And with practice, you get better at it. All right, I want to show you guys a little comic strip. And you know Dilbert, the guy with the funny tie. What type of person do you think he is? Passive, assertive, or aggressive? Okay. Passive, passive, passive. Yes, he's passive. What about Alice? Political. Yes, that could be. What about Alice? What's her style? Yeah, she's aggressive. You guys are, yeah, definitely the word choice is a clue there. The volume. Okay, so what's happening? Dilbert knows he's passive. He's not comfortable engaging with the problem, the source of the problem. So he uses his nuclear option. He calls Alice because he knows she will just crush this guy. But assuming Dilbert wanted to be assertive, how would he be able to talk directly? Remember, we talked about the three criteria: clear, and Alice was very clear and blunt. Direct, Dilbert was not direct. He was using an indirect way to get his point across. But if he wanted to be assertive, what could he do and what could he say to the person whistling in the next cubicle? Any ideas? Okay, could you please stop whistling? I'm affected by your whistling. You may want to even say how you're affected. Something like, your whistling is distracting me. I'm trying to concentrate. I feel distracted by your whistling. Okay, that's polite. Now in the class, this is the part where we talk about crafting an assertive message. And one of the things we'll learn is you don't want to judge the person because then they get defensive and often argumentative. You want to talk in terms of your feelings. So if your feeling is distracted, you're not judging them, you're just saying, this is how I feel. It's a lot more acceptable for somebody to hear that than to say something like, your whistling is rude and inconsiderate. You're just going to get an argument there, or bad blood between you. Appreciate if you can stop it. I'm affected by your whistling. Yeah, something like that. There's actually a 3-step process, which we don't have time to talk about. We covered in the course, where you say what you feel, what the effect is on you, and your request. Now, most people, they don't want to be unreasonable. They like to get along with people, but they may not be aware of it. So you just want to bring it to their attention in a very non-offensive manner by letting them know how it feels and how the impact is affecting you without judging them. So that would be a challenge for Dilbert. All right. In terms of the class, it's run by Aventis. I've been working with them probably since around 2008 when they started, quite a long time. And they've got a lot of workshops as well as degree programs. And we run this assertiveness class and a number of others, each one several times a year. Next one coming up very soon. And in fact, it'll be a week from Friday, 22nd, not from 9 to 5. Well, actually, probably 9 to 5, even though it's online. There's a promo code and a QR code you can scan and get a discount, and some phone numbers, contact information if you have any questions. And if you do have any other questions, either about the course or the content, you can ask me now. You can just type something into the chat box, and I'll address that right now if you'd like. And I'd like to thank you for your patience. We'll try and figure out what the reason for the delay is. As I said yesterday, we did a full day without any problem whatsoever. Maybe it's just the sheer number of people on this call, quite a lot more than we have in a regular class. Also, thank you for your comments, those of you who are contributing with questions. and answers. I appreciate that. And if you do have a question, you can type it in now. If you've got other things to do, I'm glad we had this opportunity to share. And I hope to see you online at this course on Friday. So have a nice rest of the afternoon. I see one question coming in. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you all. And hope to see you for the full show on Friday the 22nd. Okay, classroom setting. I don't know if they'll let us do a classroom setting. We'll have to see. I think in the next few days we'll hear more about how they're going to loosen these restrictions. Obviously, if we can get into the classroom, that would be great. But at this point, I think we're probably assuming it's going to be live.